And welcome into the Smite Challenger Circuit, the SCC as it were. It's Finch and Mifflin here. And today we actually have, I don't know, man. I think that this is almost an SPL caliber set we're starting off with. That's why I'm so pumped, man. I'm really excited to see these two teams play. It's Cold Llamas up against Belt Slap. We're starting with EU. We'll have two sets there, and then there'll be two North American sets to follow up afterwards. And emilitoo, Genetics, iceice, maniaKK, Arkkyl, Trixtank, Zyrhoes. These guys are all some of the best in their role.
I mean, yeah, we can't not talk about how sick this set is. I know when I found out this is the one we were casting together, I reached out to you instantly like, hey man, we got this sick set coming up. And it's true. I've been excited about it all week. Cold Llamas and Belt Slap are just SPL caliber rosters, as you said. It amazes me that we get to see them in the SCC. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too, man, and I think that there's a lot of matchups that I'm going to be keeping my eye on in particular, but I really think that the solo matchup could be a big deal between maniaKK and Julio. I think that's one of the levels where they're really evenly matched up, and depending on how that goes, it can be pretty important. There's a lot to sort of dive in specifically here, I would say, with this matchup, but let's take a look at which games are going to be coming up. Like I said, we're starting with two EU sets. We're at this Cold Llama Belt Slap one, but right after that, it's going to be Freshly Forged and the Poppy, so the big hitters kind of keep coming with another big matchup right after this one. And then North America, we got a doubleheader for Locked and Goated. They play Mixxiety Onset and Trick Babushka. So it looks like when it rains, it pours in terms of good sets here today. This should be a good one really all day long. So if you were, I don't know, maybe considering watching set one and going somewhere else or talking to friends or family, don't do that. Stay right here at Twitch and/or Mixer.com/SmiteGame, wherever you are, and make sure you don't miss a second of these matches.
I mean, as you said, you could go talk to your friends and family. You can go out to eat. You can do some cool real-life stuff. But instead, watching these games is probably the best thing you could do with your time, absolutely. Right now, Belt Slap and Cold Llamas are undefeated. That's not going to last much longer, right? One of them has to lose.
You're right, and it's a tough pick, isn't it, between Belt Slap and Cold Llamas? I mean, we were talking about it coming in. I think I would give a slight edge to Belt Slap, right? I think there's a little bit more recent SPL experience on that squad, and those guys, even in the SPL, were kind of at a bit of a higher level when they were playing. But I think that this matchup is going to be really even because these Cold Llama guys have been playing for a while together. Genetics is someone that I think that we don't give quite enough hype to. He continually, I think, plays at that top level. If a team needed to, I think he could be picked up into the SPL tomorrow, legitimately. So, I mean, this whole Cold Llama squad really, I think, can compete with a team the likes of Belt Slap.
Absolutely. Cold Llama's so strong, but I as well, I favor Belt Slap. The only iffy role matchup we have there, as you said, is the Guardian and Trixtank and Genetics. That's where I might favor out Genetics, but across the board, otherwise, I'm giving it to Belt Slap. I mean, Arkkyl, still one of the best hunters for my money. Dzoni, I'm so impressed by this guy constantly.
Yeah.
His jungle presence is so high. He can play these late game hyper carries incredibly well, and he plays them well in the early game. We've seen him pick Kali and still get first blood consistently. Or when he does choose to pick these early game characters, he establishes enormous leads and transitions into late game 10 minutes before the enemy jungler, so it doesn't even matter that he went for an early game focus.
Wow, Cold Llamas ban away Yamoja, Kukulkan, and Persephone and still somehow have to give away the Camazotz to the other side. Life's unfair, perhaps, Mifflin, as it feels like they've done everything just about right. That's because the Jormungandr and Chernobog bans, while I think those are some decent bans, they're not the top end, and I think that allows for something like the Camazotz to slip through, and it's a great flex pick to start with. This could go jungle, it could go solo. I could easily see that being piloted by Dzoni, potentially, or by Julio, so it really just depends. And now this Sobek comes in, and this feels to me like a bit of a Trixtank special, something he liked to play.
It does. Trixtank has been known for his Sobek, but it's also another flex pick. Sobek can still go solo, he can still go support, so we don't know where Camazotz is quite yet. It's going to be hold for Cold Llamas to really figure out what is going on with this draft. We'll see what they're starting to think once the second ban phase comes through, whether or not they start to ban out some supports, solos, or jungles. But as of right now, we can't even know either where this Camazotz is going. I think it's a fair bet that Merlin's going to go mid, but we've also seen in Europe Merlin going ADC a couple times. That's about it. That's the role variation you can get out of that Merlin. But Daji getting picked up by Cold Llamas, that's a high pressure god as well. The CC that she brings in her ultimate's going to be decent for beads burning as well. Fafnir is going to have the good engage as well. But with Fafnir's auto attack steroid onto Daji, that's going to bring a very high level of objective burn. Maybe not quite as high as Belt Slap is seeing out of this Merlin, but still competing
Yeah, and a lot of people are, I think, liking the Dodgy pick more. We're seeing her get a bit more valued because she's really strong into Kukulkan and Merlin, those two top tier mages right now. She punishes them both relatively well, so that's going to be kind of an interesting matchup, right? Is how well are Cold Llamas and iceice in particular going to be able to use this Dodgy to try and hunt down, I imagine, Zyrhoes on this Merlin, though sometimes he does like to play some weird stuff, so they might still flex it, but I imagine he'll be trying to see if he can catch up to Zyrhoes there in that mid lane. As Ram rounds out the draft, so this is a double hunter composition now for Cold Llamas, with that Fafnir to accelerate the attack speed. You already talked about it. Their objective burn is going to be really quick, and just taking one hunter out won't be enough anymore.
Yeah, you have to worry about both of them now. Structure is going to be relatively easy to burn down if they get that lead in the late game with the Fire Giant. Chang'e picked up as well. That's a healer comp. It's going to be hard for Beltslap to find their way to an easy target outside of the Hunters, because Daji's going to play the side of the map. Chang'e's got the immunity to damage in her kit, as well as a self-healing stun and heal. So if you kill one Hunter, you're going to have to commit a lot of resources with all that peel that Cold Llamas is bringing. And then you still have another Hunter that's going to be swinging away at you. Beltslap has decent dive in the Guan Yu, though.
I agree. I'm a bit worried, though, for Cold Llamas. It feels like, to me, with that draft, what they've done is tried to set themselves up for a nigh unbeatable late game, right? I mean, their ability to output damage and stay sustained and control as well is going to be really, really strong for Cold Llamas if they can make it to that point. But Beltslap has this on her. They've got this Camazotz jungle for Dzoni. I mean, Julio's on the Guan. You can rotate too. It's Trixtank takes a ton of early poke. Looks like that was the Trickster Spirit from iceice as well to try and catch up with them, but it didn't quite work. I don't know, Myth. Do you think this Cold Llama squad, first, do you agree with my read that they're a bit late game skewed? And do you think they can make it past this belt slap pressure?
They are late game skewed, but we've seen out of Europe that they're willing to wait for their first team fight until the 20-minute mark. We see all these games going about 4 or 5 kills maybe. So betting on late game isn't a hard bet to make for Cold Llamas. Fair to point out, Sobek was forced to level his pluck there, so he's going to lose the lane pressure, absolutely. But whether or not they get to late game is going to be indicative of the match. I think, as you said, it is a nigh unbeatable comp once they get to that 30-minute mark. And I think they absolutely can, as long as Beltslap doesn't really abuse that. They have shown that they're playing slow in Europe. North Americans probably wouldn't let this comp slide through. But in Europe, this could definitely happen.
I think it could. It's something where they can make it there. And that's why so much of this, I think, is going to depend on Dzoni, right, for Beltslap, and how well he can be that person that's applying pressure, that's accelerating the pace for Beltslap with this Camazotz pick. And Camazotz, we talk about him all the time, as there's a ton of Hand of the Gods picked up. I think that'll be worth mentioning as well. We've got 4 on the side of Beltslap, 3 for Cold Llamas. But we talk about it all the time. It really doesn't feel like there's a point in the game where I'm comfortable fighting Camazotz, right? Just at every point, he is someone who feels like he's favored. So I think Dzoni can kind of take that ability to box, that pressure, and then see how he kind of puts that onto the map throughout this early game, these first 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, we've been talking about Dzoni a lot. I mean, the early game pressure that he brings on even late game gods, as I stated, is insane. But now that he's on Camazotz, who is a little bit skewed towards the early game, but doesn't even have a bad late game, the additional power he's going to get off his first ability, off the Echo, about 20 at rank 1, that's enough to make him swing for about 70 to 80 per auto attack. It's going to be hard for StreakUp to escape him, as he's a ROM with only a dash for an escape. Emilitoo as well on Xbalanque isn't the safest pickup, but iceice moving in for an early gank.
Yeah, he is. That's because genetics didn't start over here in the left lane. iceice gets plucked in. We knew Trixtank took that to begin with, and iceice has to fall back. So because genetics did this strat where he kind of moved around the right side of the map, you could tell from StreakUp's positioning how far back he had to stand. Beltslap were willing to kind of strip some of that farm. That's why iceice has to rotate over. He's trying to reset that lane dynamic a bit so StreakUp can get to the farm. But Trixtank and Arkkyl remaining patient. They're not going to let this go unpunished, this early start from Cold Llamas. StreakUp gets plucked a bit late on the beads there as well, which means now he's got nothing for the knock-up. A perfect impale. Arkkyl and Trixtank punish this early start from Cold Llamas.
That's exactly what you have to do. We've seen that supports are willing to make these weird starts, especially at the beginning of Season 7 now. We don't really know what the established perfect start is. So having him outside a lane opens up Cold Llamas, or Beltslap rather, to just freeze out, not really clear the wave, zone him off. The second he makes one misplay, steps up a foot too far, gets plucked. Unfortunately, his beads were late, which cost him his life. But that's how you play it. StreakUp couldn't do much better there, besides just timing his beads a bit better.
Yeah, and that's significant, right? That is That is a very old type of thing, right? To make sure you're either early enough to where you don't get plucked at all there by the charge prayer, that you're waiting till afterwards for that follow-up CC. But like I said, man, Trixtank is so comfortable playing Sobek. It's something he's played forever, and so no surprise to me at all that he's able to find a big pluck there and set them up for pressure. But now the question becomes, did Genetics get enough accomplished on the right-hand side to make up for all this pressure that StreakUp's losing over in left? He is still getting a fairly good amount of solo farm, but he's still in trouble. He gets plugged back in, and right there to follow up is Arkkyl. Has the pillar there, does absorb the impale, but it does not save StreakUp's life. He's now down 0-2, and this is about the baddest start for Cold Llamas, as you can see.
I mean, 3 minutes in, Arkkyl already has the Ninja Tabby online. That impale was nuts. Pinning Genetics to the wall to get him out of the way so he body blocks are over for StreakUp, as well as his life continually over as well. I mean, this lane is spiraling out of control. They're going to need Dodgy to keep coming over. We need iceice to relieve some of this pressure. But by the same note, Dzoni could also rotate over there, turning it into a 3v3, and Camazotz is going to be favored in that fight every single time.
You're right, and that's what makes, I think, the jungle role so difficult. Obviously, you could speak to that, Mifflin, right? Is that now there's 2 lanes where I would say that Cold Llamas certainly don't have pressure. You don't draft this Chang'e for pressure over at Guan Yu, and now Arkkyl's way ahead of StreakUp on this ROM. The best you can hope is that maybe emilitoo can find something over Zyrhoes on this Merlin, but even then, that's a bit tough to try and see if it's really going in your favor. So where does iceice go? If he comes over to Arkkyl, he runs the risk of making that lane even worse for StreakUp.
Once a lane gets far enough ahead, as Belt Slap is doing now in Duo, usually you'll see the Hunter play up a little bit more aggressively. As he's zoning out these waves and freezing them, that means he has to play the center of the map, which is prime gank positioning for a Dodgy. Anytime that they're above the halfway point, especially in the long lane, a lane that long makes it's about a 4-second rotation from the center of it to your tower at this point. That's all time that you can get ganked. So as long as StreakUp can maintain his XP farm from a distance, keeping the wave at his own tower line, that's going to make it easier for Dodgy to move in. But as you said, still not easy, because that is a level 5 on her at 4 minutes into the game. That's a lot of damage output. You got to be worried about that, but you can't play scared. You have to stop the bleed now.
That's true, right? If you play scared, you kind of give them that they would have survived the gank instead of maybe forcing them to execute it by coming in. So I sort of see what you're speaking to. It's just tough because Anhur is not that bad of a matchup when the Dodgy comes in for the Trickster Spirit. He's got the Impale to create more space, and he has a Desert Fury for CC moving in. Maybe they even have a kill on the maniaK as the gank happens on the right-hand side. Julio is the one that gets the kill credit, and Myth, this is exactly what I was worried about. There is no point on the map where this Cold Llamas draft has even a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, we keep talking about it. These late game drafts usually want to look for the bridge pick. The only semi-bridge pickup they have is iceice on this Dodgy, but when every lane is as behind as they are, it's so hard to be a jungler. Unfortunate timing on that gank from Chang'e. Now she loses out on a blue buff. She won't be able to spam her abilities quite nearly as easily. No CDR from the blue buff, no mana regen, so her heal is going to be a little bit less potent than Guan's, making the sustain matchup a little bit favored towards Guan Yu, as well as the damage output, as he is a bruiser-focused warrior. That lane is going to be very difficult until that blue buff respawns, and even then, I doubt Dzoni allows them get it for free. They're going to have to fight over it, and fighting into a Camazotz is never fun, especially one with a lead.
And you're right, a lot of Chang'es like to just stay in lane and make use of the passive. You can tell maniaKK didn't even pick up the teleport to get back, right? It's just the med. It's all about sustaining in lane and then getting items online faster than your opponent can. Without that blue buff, that task gets harder, as maniaKK does still have the ultimate available, but look how low he is, and in comes Dzoni to look for another cleanup kill. That's 2 deaths in a row now for maniaKK in solo, and a bad situation keeps getting worse.
I mean, that was a clean jump over the ult from Dzoni, just avoid it completely, finds the kill again. I mean, that's about as bad as it can get. You die, you lose your blue buff, you walk back to lane, you don't even finish clearing the first wave once you get back, and you die again. That's a real tearjerker for maniaKK, and I imagine he's going to continue to see it. Chang'e doesn't have that much self-peel. Guan Yu's going to be able to chase her down through her CC immunity. It's going to be so difficult for her to get her footing back. Again, the only true hope in the tunnel for Cold Llamas now is that iceice can find something, or emilitoo just happens to solo Zyrhoes, but banking on anyone soloing Zyrhoes isn't going to be easy.
No,
it's all on iceice.
It is. It feels like it is a lot onto iceice, baby, to try and find some kind of way to get them back out of this. And And maniaK, I don't know that he's come up at too far forward. He really was only in the middle of the lane, but just they didn't have eyes on Dzoni, and he wasn't ready for that second gank to come back through. So he ends up getting punished. Dzoni and Julio are aggressive. Trixtank might be under siege too, but this is that blue buff we were talking about that they were not going to get for free. How about not get at all? With iceice babies low in left, they forced out the 2 in right, so the fight more about Arkkyl, who still has the chain on him, but does get pulled, but it looks like he wasn't worried about it at all. Go ahead and pull me and I'll just come to you. Now iceice baby has to run through the jungle the wrong direction. Arkkyl catches up and gets another easy kill, and that's who we were hoping would relieve the pressure, but instead ends up getting picked. So maniaK has to drop the ultimate early and right to prevent the tower dive from coming through, and he does slow down this aggression. So maybe they finally get some breathing.
Maybe just a little bit, but now that the lead is 2,000, 8 minutes into the game, every lane is winning handedly, 5-0 towards Belt Slap. They have to start being concerned about these objectives, Cold Llamas that is. They need to get some vision online, but once you're behind this much, especially in the early game, dedicating 50 gold to even a single ward, that doesn't feel good, that hurts. It slows down your build more. When you slow down your build, you can't match the power output that Belt Slap's bringing. Your fights are getting worse, but you need to win these fights to get back into it. It's a vicious cycle. They just have to pray that maybe Belt Slap gets a little bit over-aggressive with their huge lead. Maybe they make a misplay around one of these objectives. They could take a team fight around it. If maniaK can out-rotate Julio to one of these fights, Chang'e's ultimate is a complete turning point at any team fight. There's still ways to get back into it, but playing on the back foot, especially with a comp that's as late game focused, as you pointed out earlier, is going to be so difficult.
It's not going to be easy for Cold Llamas, but as you mentioned, I think that the avenues back in exist for them, and I think that is what sometimes can make these objective calls a bit tough for these teams in the lead, because if you don't go about them cleanly, that is a lot of the times the avenue back in for the team that's behind, right? They get a cheeky Sneal or something like that, or maybe you overcommit and your guys are low HP afterwards, and Cold Llamas can find some cleanup kills or something like that. As long as you're executing these objective fights cleanly, though, you should be heavily favored. So the Gold Fury is pulled now by Belt Slap. Cold Llamas, I don't even think they're going to come in to contest. The Gold Fury goes down nearly instantly, and the Gold League gets even worse, 3,000, but experience is right up there at that same mark.
This is clinical play from Belt Slap. They've got the ward coverage. They have it on top of the Gold Fury as well as around it, so they could have spotted out any rotation. They knew purple buff was spawning, and that's where the enemies would be. So if they wanted to rotate in, they would walk over the ward, potentially open themselves up to a gank inside the jungle. I mean, Belt Slap is controlling the map. They're controlling the pace. Their side of the map, they're controlling the blue buff, so Chang'e's having a hard time sustaining in her lane. The only lane that hasn't really spiraled out of control is the middle, but you don't expect that. Merlin's going to transition to late so well. Dzoni getting a little bit aggressed on here. Half health, burning fast.
Still has Bat of the Hell, though. That is his escape tool if he were to need it, and he does take it, makes it up just barely and low HP, but Genetics and iceice want to keep up the chase. Finally, Cold Llamas get one on the board as Dzoni gets a bit too aggressive, but Genetics detransforms at the end of that Draconic Corruption in enemy territory, but finds a good leap and a good hammer to shut down the aggression, but I don't think Trixtank's done with the chase. The fluff brings Genetics back in, and now he's pinned against the wall, so they do lose Dzoni. At least they get Genetics back, but support for jungle, especially one that was ahead, never feels good.
That survivability from Camazotz, Dzoni, using his ultimate to create so much space, he forced out emilitoo's ult, he forced out Genetics' ult, iceice had to use his to finish up the kill, and StreakUp in lane as well. That's 4 ultimate resources used, and that might be the reason they lost the fight afterwards. Genetics had him to de-transform afterward, getting caught out a little bit. I mean, when you do get a pick, it is nice, but having to use that much resource means that you're not going to be able to fight into this red buff as well. You're not going to be able to defend your purple buff nearly as easily. It is a pick. It's a way back in the room, but as of yet, it's not quite enough.
You're right, it doesn't come at 0 cost. Maybe they can offset some of that by taking care of Trixtank, who got stuck too far forward. Zyrhoes wanted no part of that. My man was out of there after making sure that buff invade went through successfully, and so instead, Zyrhoes will come back and start to get farmed up. But this is what you were asking for, right? A couple of ways back in. This is just the beginning, you know, of climbing yourself back out of the hole, but this is how it starts, as Dzoni is in position for the blue buff invade, and I think he was successful for it. He's going to look for the disengage, and maniaK has no way to keep him locked down, so Dzoni's out of there.
I mean, props to Genetics being here every single time trying to counter this engagement. Maybe if they can get iceice over there as well, get the 3v2 onto the blue buff, that would be a way to get in there. It's one of the few times that Belt Slap is opening themselves up on the enemy side of the map without a numbers advantage, so that might be a fight they're favored in. Instead, iceice electing to move in towards that purple buff in an attempt to steal, but Arkkyl, so scary, you don't want to fight into him, especially now that he's got this Blood Forge online, he's got some crit online as well, 3-0 on her in the early game. All things that I don't want to fight.
And I can't think of many who do enjoy fighting them. StreakUp's done a good job staying relatively close. Look at the net worth. He is a good bit behind, but it's not as bad, I feel like, as it could have been, as Dzoni has his ultimate forced out defensively again and uses it to get himself to safety. emilitoo used his ultimate to try and lock him down, but it was not enough. So good work there by Dzoni, staying alive. Remember, he doesn't have beads. He went for Blink with that first relic. That might be why it seems that he's been called out a couple of times. He doesn't have that extra CC immunity.
iceice now with a level lead. That's interesting to point out, especially considering how this match has been going for Belt Slap. 2-1 on iceice. As we've said, the one redeeming grace, and he's really pulling himself up through the mud trying to get his team back into this match. 3,000 gold deficit favored Belt Slap, but considering it was 2,000 at 4 minutes, this is fantastic for Cold Llamas. They've essentially fully stopped that bleed, and with their late game focused comp, I imagine they're incredibly happy with it.
It's just a question of how well can they handle these next objective fights, right? This next Fury is only a minute away from spawning, as it looks like we do have a pause coming out. So they've stemmed the bleeding for now, but that rune will reopen if this Fury ends up going down and they lose a pick around that, or potentially they lose Fury and they give us so much ground that they lose Pyromancer as well. So I think it's got to be things like this. When they come for those red buff invades, Myth, they got to make sure they keep punishing them like that, maybe get Trixtank, maybe get Dzoni like they've done. I think that's about the only thing they can do right now to try and slow this down.
Yeah, looking for picks around the invade is a good avenue in, but even if you look at their team fight, it's not completely terrible at this point in the game. If maniaKK can get involved around this next Gold Fury fight, Chang'e bringing that multi-man stun, at least 2, would be enough to completely turn a fight. Genetics with the global stim to his team, if he hits all 5, especially with 2 hunters, they're going to be swinging incredibly hard. emilitoo with the global ultimate to disrupt Belt Slap's comp. It has ways to fight in. However, it's really, I think, whoever rotates first out of this solo lane. If Julio makes his play first inside this Gold Fury fight, it's likely going to go the favored Belt Slap way. But again, if Chang'e is there, that's a huge turning point. Whether or not they spot it out, both teams have fantastic ward coverage around this Gold Fury. It's that defensive ward coverage that you want, that ward that's directly on top of gold. Once you get that positioning around it, that's when it's easier to fight in.
Well, the Fury is up on the map now, so the question becomes, how much are these teams going to rotate over to try and fight for it? It looks like Arkkyl is going to be sticking in lane, not too worried about coming over to it right away. Dzoni's making his way over here, though, so maybe this is going to be a bit of a positional commitment. There's plenty of members from Cold Llamas on this side of the map, too. But this is good from Arkkyl. He can kind of force StreakUp to keep coming back to lane and then play up around his escape route. So if he tries to rotate into gold, he can end up getting caught out for it. And Dzoni's over on this side too. StreakUp has to make sure he's playing this extra careful. If he gives up a pick, then the Fury might be free. Dzoni blinks in, forces out the Aegis right away, and Desert Fury was there. Well executed from Belt Slap, and now they're heavily favored going into this Fury.
Yeah, now 4v5 going to the Fury. Cold Llama is not favored. However, Ram has a relatively low respawn timer. It was about 30 seconds if I saw that right. And I don't think his ultimate got off either, so he will be able to get involved a little bit more quickly. Maybe he doesn't catch up to the fight if a fight does erupt around the Gold Fury, but he will be able to use that ultimate to get himself involved from a distance, opening up maybe a potential steal potential or even a cleanup kill with that semi-global. But it's going to be incredibly hard fighting into not only a lead, but now a numbers deficit as well.
It makes things even more difficult, and I think that's why this patience from Belt Slap was so strong, and it looks like they will get the Primal Fury uncontested as we return to the game, Mifflin. Really, no one was able to make it in. I mean, judging off what you said from StreakUp's death timer, maybe 12 seconds and that was over. So yeah, Belt Slap got that one quite nicely. and they will now extend the lead. So that was kind of that scare point I was saying for Cold Llamas, where the lead had plateaued, but that's because they'd done the big neutral objective for the time. As soon as that came back up, though, they weren't able to defend, and they lose a player. This could be the answer back, though, starting up this Pyro, but Julio is on his way. Trixtank is here, too. Cold Llamas do secure the Pyromancer, but now they've got to run for the hills. Arkkyl doesn't even let iceice make it up to the Powwow. maniaKK in some trouble now as well. He has a ton of physical protections, but Julio's on top of him, trying to slow him down. maniaKK gets locked into the blue buff alcove, and Arkkyl gets a double kill. Emilitoo pulled back in as well, but Zyrhoes is using the flicker to try and cover the distance. Arkkyl still has the leap, and he's not going to let Emilitoo escape. That's 3 for him throughout that engagement as Arkkyl continues his reign of terror.
They got the Pyromancer boat at what cost? 3 of your lives, as well as a potential Fire Giant now. I mean, Genetics is around, but Fafnir, especially at level 11, no second active available. It's going to be so hard for him to steal it. They don't know that he's there. He's completely hidden. How is he going to play this?
Can have a hammer over the wall, perhaps, but it doesn't get there in time. Belt Slap confirm it correctly. Genetics still has Draconic Corruption and can still try and get back out of here if he needs to, but his life might be forfeit after trying to go for that steal. He does use the Draconic Corruption immediately, though, gets charged prayed, and no way for him to make it back out of there. So this has just been a really clean game from Belt Slap here so far, as iceice wastes the blink trying to catch up to a backing member there, can't find him. I don't know, man, if you could ask Belt Slap to have played this much better throughout these first 17 minutes.
It's been absolutely clinical, disciplined play coming from Belt Slap. 6,500 gold in their favor. They still have 2 tier 1 towers available to burn through. They've got 3 tier 2 towers. There's a lot of neutral gold available on the map. They might not get a Phoenix off of this Fire Giant, but once they clear out those towers, the Gold Fury is going to respawn as well. That's an immense amount of gold. I'm not very good at math, so I'm not going to add it up myself now, but I'm sure someone in chat's got it down for us. I mean, this lead already 6,500 is oppressive, right? There's probably another 6,000 just on the map waiting to be taken. It's going to be very difficult. The second they're done with all those towers and the gold free, they back to spend it up. Fire Giant's likely going to be respawning. At least Pyromancer will be. I mean, the avenue back into this game now is a defensive positioning around your own Phoenix, hoping that maybe Belt Slap goes for a bit of a risky siege, but your defensive comp isn't too strong. Double Hunter lacking the traditional mage AoE. It's going to be hard to keep them out of your Phoenix.
It is going to be tough, and I think that this is the risk that you run, Mifflin, when you go with a draft like this from Cold Llamas, one that does kind of play a bit slow throughout this beginning of the game. We're seeing that get punished pretty handily, especially because it starts with this weird start from Genetics where he's kind of over on the right-hand side of the map. I didn't quite get to see what he was up to over there, but it did not end up being worth StreakUp losing all that pressure in lane and dying twice in a row, eventually a third time around the Fury. I know that these invades are strong right now, that these different starts with the support are powerful, but that is sort of that downside risk that you run, especially with late game skewed draft, that you could end up making things even worse.
Absolutely. As I said, towers burning through now. It looks like they're completely grouped up around their own Phoenixes, knowing that defending a tier 2 tower is nearly a death sentence, but maniaKK, a little bit too aggressive, getting caught out.
Yeah, and Trixtank's not going to miss on those charge praise. He's lurking in the waters, waiting for maniaKK. That is a good stun from Genetics, but it's not going to be enough. maniaKK gets gobbled up for the 4th time this game. The side lanes really got punished in this one. A collective 0-7 for Cold Llamas. It's not been their day, and now it's just a march down Main Street here from Belt Slap as they start this middle Phoenix. There's still 4 members around to defend as Genetics leaps in, forced into the Draconic Corruption with that leap on cooldown, and the charge prey, of course, is awaiting for him. Gets pulled right back into Zyrhoes' damage, but it's not enough. So Julio goes atop the Horus. Trixtank does end up falling for it, but now Emilitoo isolated as Arkkyl completes 9 in a row. That makes him divine if you're keeping track at home. They get the minions into range, and they'll now threaten the mid Phoenix as well, and Cold Llamas cannot hope to defend.
I'm not sure that Trix has missed a single charge prey this game. It's been 19 minutes in. I don't think that I've personally seen one. Getting that Phoenix is a direct result of maniaKK getting picked out. It's so hard to defend 4v5, especially when your only true magic damage is this Chang'e. Your only true AoE ability is this Chang'e. Once that's no longer available, even then she's not one of the best AoE mages in the game, but when she's not there, she's nothing. 4 versus 5 on the Phoenix with this huge lead. Belt Slap going to take it absolutely free. Now they get to return to base, use the remainder of their Fire Giant time to maybe pick up these neutral objectives in the Gold Fury, or even continue a push. Fire Giant will likely run out by the time they get to one of these Phoenixes, as all the lanes are pushed up in the sides. But it's not a huge deal when you're about 11,000 gold up 20 minutes in. The enemy team's highest level is 18, but he hasn't even started working on his 5th item yet. I mean, it's so difficult now when you, especially as you said earlier, draft for the late game. You've gotten completely taken out of it. Late game might not even be an option anymore.
It might not come, and it would require, I think, at this point, some mistakes from Beltslap in order for Cold Llamas to get there. I think that their interaction point has kind of passed at this point, and as this Gold Fury should go down pretty cleanly for Beltslap, I don't see a world where Cold Llamas defend, but there is a big grouping for them in left, and this is something I think that you have to do when you're behind. If you're going to go out into the jungle for farm at all, then it probably has to be as a group so you can at least disengage safely to don't run the risk of getting picked, and then they'll back up and try and play some defense around this next point. And with Hunters, I don't know, Myth, their base defense really is not all that strong as it would be, I think, if you had a more typical mage in there as well.
It won't be easy at all. It's whether or not Genetics can find a 6cc chain in range for these Hunters to deal damage safely, but 12,000 gold now behind. Fire Giant respawning soon. At what point are your Hunters safe to swing on just about anybody? I would say nearly never. Johnny's got the blink to engage on any Hunter that steps up too far. Julio has shown that he's willing to ride his horse into just about any situation through any target to find these high priority targets in the backline. Trix ever on point with these charge prays. Nowhere is safe, but they're still moving in towards this Phoenix. They're making an all or nothing play. 4 people grouped up now. Julio making the engagement.
And they force the Draconic Corruption out from Genetics early on. Julio finds a stun too, but he is starting to get a bit shredded. Even gets hit by a chain, and without the ultimate, he will get pulled back in, but Julio, even still, is alive. He gets another heal back off, and Trixtank gets the kill in the StreakUp. Arkkyl gets iceice. It's an overcommitment now from Cold Llamas, and they're starting to pay. Johnny takes care of emilitoo as well, and now the rest of the squad has to run for the hill. Mifflin, I think I initially liked this call to come get the tier 2 tower. They were trying to force a trade at what they thought would be a Fire Giant from Beltslap, but Beltslap backed in time to defend, and then Cold Llamas, I think they stuck around too long. What did you see?
I saw the exact same thing you did. They were probably assuming that Fire Giant was going to get pulled so they could trade out the Phoenix at least, but instead Julio got there a little bit early, but that's all Cold Llamas saw was Julio, so when he engaged 4 versus 1, you feel like you're favored.
But instead, it was a bit of a bait, not unlike what happened here to maniaKK, as Arkkyl now immortal, 11-0-3, undying, as he was the one that I think really put the stamp on this game, him and Trixtank. Genetics is the only one still standing. He cannot defend all by himself. 22 minutes, 53 seconds. Welcome back to the SCC, everyone. Apologies that we had that brief outage there, but fortunately, it was kind of a decent timing. We got to finish off that game 1, and now we're back to keep on moving with game number 2. We're in the middle of the set between Beltslap and Cold Llamas. And Myth, that game, I mean, it really felt like Cold Llamas were kind of never in it, right? I mean, they lost pressure in both side lanes almost immediately. There really wasn't anywhere for iceice to go. What did you see there in that game? What went so wrong for Cold Llamas?
It was immediately upon the start. Once Anhur had complete control of duo lane, being once Rama was left alone, they zoned him off the first 2 waves. If Anhur hits level 2 first, that's already going to be incredibly hard to play into, but losing your life on the back of that as well means that lane is relatively over. Once both side lanes started to lose as well, that's when iceice as the jungler really has no avenue back into the game. Ganking mid is incredibly dangerous because it's going to be a 3v3 more times than not, and once the 2 of the 3 members in that 3v3 are going to be behind, you don't want to take that fight anymore. That's when you generally look towards these dual lanes to get yourself back into the game off the good ganks. But you can't do that because there's an oppressive Anhur, as well as a Guan with a relatively large lead there. There was no real avenue for iceice to find himself any footing. And once the jungler is out of the game, that's once everyone's playing at a deficit. You don't have that member that can really turn these fights in your favor. Especially playing into a Camazotz, again, for my money, and I'll say it forever, continue to ban it in ranked, chat, please. It's the best character in the game. He's so good. Having the ability to remove yourself from a playfield.
The championship ring on it? Okay,
dude, I would.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Find a better god, you can have my ring, chat, okay?
Does that make them a world champion officially? Is that how that works? Is that
I think I'll keep my in-game title, but they can they can tell their friends and they can wear it at like Halloween, but I don't think you can claim it like on your tax returns or something.
Right, you're not going to get anything there. And there were some interesting points in that game, I think, where Belt Slap really made it hard for Cold Llamas to come back in, just aside from the lead, right? Before that second Gold Fury, I believe, they got that pick on the StreakUp in lane. They gave themselves the 5v4 advantage for that. Before the Fire Giant, that was on the back of an overcommitment from Cold Llamas onto that left side Phoenix. They pressured the tier 2, then they stuck around too long when they only saw Julio, and he bought a ton of time, and then winning that fight sets them up for an easy grab on objectives, right? So I think that not only did Belt Slap have a lead, but they played really cleanly with it. They never stepped too far out of line. There were a couple picks there onto Dzoni and Trixtank around red buff, but they were fine with those. They never gave too much up. And when you play that cleanly with a lead, it's hard to lose it.
It really is, but both teams are capable of doing that. I think if Cold Llamas gets a similar lead, they're going to run with the game as well. Both teams so capable of playing cleanly that whoever establishes dominance in this early game and has the better draft should win just about every single time. Both of these squads are so intelligent when it comes to Smite. Speaking of intelligence, Cold Llamas banning out that Camazotz, real smart play, especially after we saw Dzoni really fragging out with it. And it looks like all of these bans are targeted at Dzoni, Bakasur, and Kali, some of his signature characters as well.
Yeah, I know last year his signature pick was the Ao Kuang, but I think that he's just not quite strong enough nowadays. We might not end up seeing him, but there's still plenty of good picks for him. And because of this strategy, look what they end up leaving up. The Persephone goes over to Belt Slap. Cold Llamas take the Jormungandr in that slot, and I'm a bit surprised. I know Jormungandr can be strong, but he's not particularly highly valued right now. I wouldn't necessarily say. So I think giving up the Persephone in that slot is a bit risky, but maybe they had their own plan and they didn't want the Persephone there. If it's going to be a Hell mid, you don't have room for a Persephone.
You don't. Hell mid, going to bring the healing as well as huge damage output. People like to talk about Hell as if she's exclusively good in the late game. At level 3, she's got some of the highest burst damage output of any mage available. Yes, she has to be incredibly close range to deal it, which is unsafe, but with the help of a Horus potentially setting up for her, as well as additional healing coming out from him to set up for a defensive positioning around the Hell, it's going to be hard to find your way towards her. Whether or not Belt Slap can find a jungler that can get onto Hell is going to be indicative of how this game goes. Hell, if left alone, if she establishes any lead in the early game, she can almost single-handedly win that mid lane 3v3.
Cold Llamas are not just banning away junglers, they're specifically banning away hyper carries, because Unbot is still out there. He's a huge jungle pick right now that you could take into the jungle. Still take Thor, right? But they're banning away the Kalis and the Sets and the Bakasuras here instead. They're trying to get right at Johnny's God Pool in particular and limit it. And remember, Cold Llamas still don't have their jungle selected either. The Daji gets banned away by Belt Slap to try and limit what iceice can pick. There's still some good picks out there, but I'm just a bit surprised that they went so narrow in what they chose to ban away from the jungle.
It seems like they realized they didn't have their jungler either, and taking out 4 when you don't have one for yourself, they shift their focus towards banning the Vamana, which is a traditional solo lane pick, who is, again, an incredibly potent pick going into Hell. His CC immunity and ability to stick to gods is going to completely shut her down. Arachne picked up by Cold Llamas. I'm a huge fan of this god. I think she has incredible damage output. I love it. The trade potential that she has, any 1v1 that anyone decides to take against her in the jungle, she's going to win that. She would beat Camazotz in a 1v1. She has similar sustain and a higher damage output as well as CC in a stun for her auto attacks. She has the similar ability to exit the playfield, which I value incredibly highly in Smite. It means that if you want to engage, you exit the playfield through her ultimate, allowing her to run across some webs in the sky. You can't be stopped on your engagement. You're going to get past any sort of defense. Or if you're trying to escape, no one's going to hit you up there, bud. Just crawl on out, jump down forever away. It's so strong. Ratatoskr pilled up from Belt Slap. Similarly, he's going to have that global presence and the ability to leave the playfield again. But he's going to bring presence to the entirety of the map, as well as a huge engagement factor.
But I like this, though. I think Cold Llamas have given themselves a position, Mifflin, where they can contest throughout the game much more early. And they still have a bit of a late-game insurance policy with StreakUp. Arkkyl in trouble, has to use the Purification Beads. It's 5 members of Cold Llamas bear down on him. There's iceice on the Arachne, setting up for first blood for maniaKK. And they're not going to get bullied in the early game this time. They fight aggressive. Trixtank, though, blinking in. Even with this many members here, not going to be able to find a whole lot. And Cold Llamas daring him to try and overstep. maniaKK is going to have to TP back over to lane, and an unfortunate start for Belt Slap.
It is, but only 1 kill here is not going to be too bad. Genetics doing that tried and true start of trying to slow down the jungler. Dzoni, half health before the buff even spawns. Finds his own buff, but At what cost? It's going to be so hard for him to continue to farm, especially at 1/10 health. No potions left available to him. The sustain is going to be nearly gone. Now it's all on him just to farm up for his acorn. He's not even going to be looking for these early engagements. Genetics has actively shut him down, and he's not done either. Double dipping, following him to the red buff.
And look, it's a bit of a swap. emilitoo was mid for them last game, right? And StreakUp was the one over in left getting a bit bullied out. This time they bring emilitoo over to play this on her, and he'll be left alone as Dzoni tries desperately to defend the red, but maybe Genetics finally overcommitted. He's getting slowed. There's a ton of damage coming his way, and Zyrhoes can't quite lock him down. Genetics might have made it safely out when the axe misses, and that was even with a rotation over from Arkkyl as well to try and help out with it. So Genetics doing a great job, not only fighting him around the red buff, but of avoiding death.
Avoiding death is so huge there. That would have completely equalized the game. Yes, you got first blood. Yes, you stole the red buff. But had he lost his life, that would have opened up a counter rotation. Cold Llama's red buff is still up themselves, so had he fallen, they would likely have lost that. iceice playing aggressive over here. Trixtank forced to use his hog on some bat camps. That's about as good as you could hope for. With hog, it is a defensive measure to make sure that you don't lose out on farm, and that's exactly what he used it for. However, now that Trixtank is on that side of the map, he's going to be leeching more farm off of Zyrhoes. He's still level 1 about 2 minutes into the game. It's not exactly where you want your Sobek to be. He's one of those guys that has to put himself out of position in order to engage with the pluck. But I imagine Trixtank is absolutely comfortable at this point in the game. The lead, although 1,000 gold at 1 minute is pretty insane.
Yes.
Hell isn't going to be able to move very aggressively throughout their jungle. She still has to farm up until level 5 or 6. I imagine we'll see some early defense.
And maniaKK looking a bit better over on the right-hand side as well. So, I mean, it just goes to show you what a world of difference it does to play a bit more around this early game. You can still have some late-game skewed elements, right? But you got to make sure that you're still competitive at this point in the match. And I think Genetics is doing that with this Horus, who's a great early-game brawler, as is the Arachne, really at all games. Points of the game, she's good at taking those small skirmishes, those 1v1s. So it puts Cold Llamas into a much better spot here this time to try and contest. As emilitoo actually quite low, and that's scary up against an Ullr, but Arkkyl must not have the cooldowns, or emilitoo would be pushing up daisies instead. Arkkyl just has to fall back as Cold Llama's going to try and make a blue buff invade happen. Julio, Dzoni, and Trixtank all in the way. Trixtank gets the blink off before he gets put in combat, but still in trouble. But what peel, though, coming up from the rest of Beltslap to get Trixtank out of there. He's still alive. Julio waiting patiently for his transformation to come out, and that's why Dzoni is re-engaging, and it works out perfectly. iceice maybe ends up falling, and now Genetics in trouble too. Maybe, though, maniaKK could find some way to turn this around. He can't. It ends up being a 2-for-1 for Beltslap.
Julio transforming there was the turning point of that fight, immediately turning what was a terrible fight into a 2-for-0 trade. You lose the blue buff, but you're not feeling too terrible about it, especially because Chulainn doesn't really need mana. That blue buff would have just been CDR and a little bit of additional HP 5 for him.
Yep.
So it's not too bad there. It's actually relatively good. You completely evened out the gold gap. It's an even match from here on out. Now that Beltslap isn't entirely behind, they can start to look to put some pressure on this Hell, make sure she doesn't transition into the mid and late game as easily as she might have beforehand. Cold Llamas with a bit of an overstay, but that transformation, you can call it skill. I'm going to call it luck at this point. He hasn't been truly controlling his rage. Julio turning it around completely.
Yeah, I mean, the re-engage was entirely around the transformation, right? I mean, whether or not the timing was convenient, I think they had the opportunity to disengage there if they needed to, but instead, especially Dzoni, who dashed in first, right ahead of Julio, had complete trust in that rage transformation timing and that Julio would be there to peel for him, and it worked out perfectly. So I'm 100% willing to give that good coordination over to Beltslap. I think they played that one well. And like you said, they're right back into this game now. Arkkyl and emilitoo both on aggressive hunters here on the left side, so this could potentially be a fight with tons of fireworks happening over in left. StreakUp's in mid up against Zyrhoes. Those two probably won't get as aggressive, but Julio is being sought out. It looks like he does still have that ultimate for a bit of peel, and he ends up needing every bit of that to make it out.
Trixtank and Ratatoskr in the jungle deciding whether or not they want to rotate in. If they continue to look for aggression towards Julio, they have to be wary about this counter gank. However, Dzoni, still only level 4, 5 minutes in the game, a level down on iceice, and that global ultimate's where he's going to bring his pressure.
Trixtank does a good job avoiding getting away from iceice and StreakUp. But yeah, Myth, I mean, Ratatoskr, I think, in this early game can be really, really strong, especially with that ultimate. I mean, yes, pretty similar to what a Thor can do, but there might be more of an engagement than they think. Genetics is lurking in the jungle, but cannot find anyone with that stun that he was looking for, so everyone disengages. But they're still moving into the Chaos jungle to try and get aggressive. Genetics wants to loop over and meet up with maniaKK, but Johnny's here. The numbers maybe slightly favoring Beltslap in terms of who got here first, but StreakUp is going to be clear to rotate over as well, so this can't be a long engagement for Beltslap as Trixtank starts to fall low. maniaKK goes into that World Serpent ultimate. They're all trying to catch up to the Croc, but Trixtank's out of there safely. They'll force Johnny and Julio out, and this should be a clean blue buff invade.
Unfortunately, Julio had expended his enraged stance right before that engagement started up, so he wouldn't be available to transform and turn this fight again. Blue buff stolen away pretty cleanly. Trixtank makes it out with his life. The gold deficit still just about null. This blue buff not the biggest steal away for them. As we've said before, Julio doesn't entirely need it, but that one level deficit is a bit indicative of this lane. Chulainn should be getting the upper hand, but instead, now maniaKK is ahead, so that's a free avenue of ganks for iceice. iceice also having a pretty good matchup into Julio. That Salmon Leap isn't quite enough to break off the webs. It's going to be very easy for Arachne to chase her down.
Yeah, not bad there, Myth. I hear you. As there's more aggression. This time it's from Beltslap, though, near the red buff. Trying to see if they can find an invade. There's really just not much there for them. So what is it? I mean, you were talking a bit about how this is that time when Ratatoskr really comes online. Obviously, the ultimate's big for him here. But when you're evaluating where to take this big pressure ultimate and how important this first cooldown is, where do you want to see Johnny go?
Immediately dunk onto this hell. You have Zyrhoes on this long-range mage to poke from afar. Once he's healthy, if you can find the dunk on a hell and she doesn't find the cleanse, that should be an instant blow-up, easily with a defense shred from Ratatoskr, the ultimate from Persephone, as well as her long-range first ability. It's going to be pretty easy to pick her up, especially if she's inside your tower.
Yeah, she's been plucked back in, but maybe can get this kill onto Zyrhoes, but Zyrhoes jukes around and is able to avoid falling there. That's something Zyrhoes got pretty good at his time playing some of those immobile mages, is finding ways to still stay alive, and it works for them underneath the tier 1. Almost Mifflin, like you saw into the future there. Johnny gets that kill. Maybe not quite the way that you envisioned it, but Johnny coming in and shutting down StreakUp. It's good either, however you get there, it's good. As iceice Baby and Genetics are all on this right-hand side, and Julio might think in this rage transformation he can afford to get aggressive, but the numbers would say otherwise. He makes his way back to the tier 1.
Now Trixtank a little bit out of position here, surrounded by 2. He should be able to disengage freely. It's this blue buff that all eyes are on, just spawned on the side of Beltslap's map, but it looks like it's going to go uncontested this time. Might be Chulaann's first blue buff since the first one.
Yeah, he has not gotten a lot of these, so the mid pressure does go the way that they want, but when it's a hell, I feel like you have to do a lot of pressure onto her. As maniaKK only in a little bit of trouble. As long as he still has that World Serpent ultimate, he always has his get out of jail free card, so he's never too worried there. How much do you feel like you kind of have to put pressure on a hell to really, I don't know if shut her down is the right word, but to feel like you did enough to delay her?
Delaying her is the name of the game at this point. All eyes are on this 3v3 around mid. 8 minutes into the game, this is when we really see these team fights start to erupt around the Gold Fury. I know we say Europe likes to play slow, but they do play methodical, and playing objectives is the correct way to play Smite. And as I say that, we see them group up on that side of the map. It's going to be pretty indicative of how this game's going to go, whether or not this Gold Fury goes towards Beltslap or Cold Llamas at this point. Emilitoo, relatively low health, and is forced to use his ultimate on his own buff.
They had great vision. They knew exactly what Cold Llamas were up to. Genetics charges to the skies and brings it right back down in place, more for the shield than anything, and it does keep everyone topped up and discourage any further initiation from Beltslap. So that play doesn't really pan out for them. In fact, they're entirely on the run. I don't know if Cold Llamas are going to let them do that for free. The blink starting to come out as Genetics look for the lockdown, but Zyrhoes has that grasp of death available. It does not stop iceice Baby, though, from cleaning up the kill. A big knock-up from Johnny, but there's tons of CC and cleanses there. So Arkkyl has to pick up the mantle and put iceice Baby down, but maniaKK finds the double, getting aggressive underneath the tier 2 tower, and Cold Llamas find 3 for 1.
I mean, maniaKK did so much there. He zoned out one member. The second Ratatoskr disengages off his own ultimate, loses about half of his health to maniaKK as well. Gold Fury could be started up here. They have the numbers for it, but instead decide to slow it down, continue their farm. No reason to take a risky play at this point.
Wow.
StreakUp was out of mana. But I have to imagine that's a bit of a misplay. Had Emilitoo rotated over, that should have been an uncontested Gold Fury, especially off the back of those free picks.
It should have been. I'm a bit surprised. I mean, they've even got good ward coverage down, so you can at least give it a try, right, for Cold Llamas and C, but they're a bit low on the back end of it, and as you said, they didn't want to give up too much on the end of that play. And Julio, man, just gets out-rotated there, right? I mean, maniaKK is at that fight, and then Julio is still kind of over here and right, chilling. So it's just hard for beltslap to win that one when maniaKK is over there and having that much impact at this point now, Myth. So this is looking much better from Cold Llamas. They're still a bit down in terms of gold, like a couple hundred or so, but they're absolutely in this one. But beltslap have recognized that this could potentially go longer. They already have the Brawler's Beat Stick there for Dzoni. They're trying to get some tools online to deal with this hell.
I'm not sure that beltslap really wants this game to go the absolute full late game duration. It's so
Agreed.
hard to favor a team that has, or so easy, I should say, to favor a team that has hell. StreakUp on this hell is going to be absolutely massive in the late game. The passive healing, emilitoo, are you okay? Yes, you are. The disengage comes out, genetics comes in with a heal, but Zyrhoes in mid getting aggressed on by this Arachne.
Well, that's why I like emilitoo. I don't know if you noticed, but he lost 75% of his HP and was still holding W afterwards, right? He still wanted to fight. iceice has to take to the sky, gets under a lot of pressure there in mid, and has to use the ultimate in order to escape, but is still considering playing aggressive as well. Gets a bit of healing from that hell and is ready to keep battling. Arkkyl, though, in some trouble. emilitoo goes to the Desert Fury, leaps away, and now he doesn't have any help to get away from Dzoni. Dzoni can't find the stun, but cleans up the kill as emilitoo, looking for fights, gets baited into trouble.
I mean, that's hard to play around. Ratatoskr, one of the most global junglers that you could pray for. He's instantly there the second they step out of bounds. beltslap not going to show the same level of caution that Cold Llamas was, and immediately go towards that gold. Horus ultimate, able to stop it in its tracks. Gold Fury around 50% health, 4-stack from beltslap.
My man brought the squad, didn't need genetics, rolls up with all his boys, and puts an end to the Gold Fury. Now they're pulling it for themselves, and Trixtank, the only one that can make it in. There's some steal potential, but can't quite get it. The Gold Fury gets reset. Grasp of Death comes all the way through, and he pulls StreakUp back towards the rest of the squad. But the Gold Fury does end up being dropped for now. beltslap do just enough with those ultimates from Zyrhoes and Trixtank to defend, but Cold Llamas won't give it up. They're going to pull this Gold Fury again, try and force beltslap in without some of their best ultimates. So Julio comes right to the back line, has the Spear of Mortal Pain to knock everybody up, and the Gold Fury gets dropped yet again. And beltslap have done their job. They're backing up. They've reset the Gold Fury, and they don't have to stick around.
And it's picked up again. It's blowing my mind. Dzoni hasn't returned to base. He's on the other side of the map. Gold Fury going to go the way of Cold Llamas, completely uncontested. Dzoni elected to do back camps, mid camps, and a wave in solo rather than get ready for this Gold Fury defense. And beltslap has to give it up. They can't take the fight 4 versus 5 on this Gold Fury. That was really well played from both teams. Cold Llamas did a good job of repulling it every time they had an opportunity. beltslap stopped 2 aggressive pulls on this Gold Fury. The third one was just enough to get it their way, but that is questionable play from Dzoni to just not even participate in that objective fight.
I agree, and it ends up hurting beltslap there a bit as they lose that Fury, just as you said. And Cold Llama is able to even this game back up a bit, if not move the game in their own direction. So let's look at some of this itemization. I was talking a bit earlier, Mifflin, about how we were going to see some itemization from beltslap to try and stop this hell. Well, now there's a Divine Ruin. Zyrhoes goes right into some flat pin and anti-heal early on, and they have the Brawler's Beat Stick. I imagine we'll see a Cursed Off from either Julio or Trixtank down the line as well. Too late for Julio. He has Blink and Teleport already, so that duty will fall to the Sobek. On the other side, StreakUp's starting to get to that point where he's going to be hard to deal with. He's got Book of Thoth and Breastplate of Valor, and once that gets finished, or he's starting to work on the Breastplate of Valor, he'll be pretty hard to kill.
Once BOV is done, that's going to make him a much harder target for Dzoni to jump onto, which might be matched by the fact that Dzoni electing to go the full glass cannon build rather than what we would normally see in Ratatoskr, which is a bruiser build. He elects to pick up Transcendence completely, now starting to stack it up 14 minutes into the game. But this hell is starting to reach that critical tipping point of she isn't going to be dealing as much damage as Persephone, but her healing and her damage in conjunction are going to be so potent, as well as her ability to escape these fights. This Breastplate of Valor is coming online. Additional defense might come online in the form of a helmet or even some magical defense as well. It's going to be very hard for beltslap to find their targets.
Dzoni looks for emilitoo again, but emilitoo answers with the Desert Fury. That's enough to get him out of there. And iceice Baby should be able to clean this kill up. Good blink from Dzoni, and Trixtank will be here to help. Arkkyl goes in and cleans up the kill into Emil. His life gets traded out, but that does buy space for Dzoni to escape. I say that, but Genetics nearby, but can't hit any piece of it. Johnny has the juke boots and makes it out. So now maniaKK has to use the Jormungandr ult to hunt him down, and Johnny's juking that too. How does this little tiny rat survive at all? He manages to make it out of there. Cold Llama's now grouped up in left with a chance to threaten the tier 2 tower, and poor Trixtank, he can't stop 4 members all by himself. All he can hope to do is perhaps delay as Zyrhoes on his way. Johnny as well. There is the grasp of death that hits on the wall, and everyone should be connected. So Genetics provides the shielding for them, but I think at this point they got to give that tier 2 up.
That was incredible play from Dzoni. We haven't seen jukes like that since Shadow Q at launch tournament, evading every single member that comes at him. Blinks past the Arachne, gets a little bit overstay on the purple buff, doesn't matter, Genetics can't hit anything, moves into his tier 2 tower, and then still the gauntlet continues as maniaKK ults over the wall multiple times trying to find him, but just couldn't land anything either. Dzoni on that tiny rat, the little rat that couldn't quite be put down.
It's a nice escape there from Johnny. They do still end up trading out those kills. emilitoo and Arkkyl, I believe, both ended up falling on the back of that engagement. And even though Arkkyl 2, 3, and 1, he's a bit behind emilitoo, who's been experience farming a bit better as Pyromancer goes down for Cold Llamas. That's a big deal. They're able to find one more neutral objective on the map that Belt Slap cannot quite contest there. Mifflin and Belsup got to do a bit better job, I think, of making sure they're at least making them work for it. They did contest that first Fury, but the final time they couldn't get back in there, and this Pyromancer just kind of gets snuck away.
Yes, they are getting the neutral objectives, but at this point, they're only about 1,000 gold up. They've got a gold Fury to themselves. They've got a tower lead. They've got one more tower killed than Cold Llamas does, or Belt Slap, rather. They've got the Pyromancer, but even with all of that put together, they've only got 1,000 gold lead. They're also up a kill. They need to start playing the map a little bit better. They need to start taking these team fights. Maybe instead of taking the objectives, you try and force a fight off of it. Now that Hel is at this critical tipping point where she's so powerful, might be her best stance in the game before all of the anti-heals online from the enemy team. You can start to use your aggressive Hel to start forcing these fights instead of maybe going for these objectives.
And now the long drawn-out fights do heavily favor Cold Llamas, and Belt Slap got to find some kind of way to end these things quickly. I imagine the Ratatoskr and the Ullr are both right at about that point where they're still getting the maximum value from them both, but perhaps that window might be starting to close. I was wondering where emilitoo was going to be going. He was sitting on that Hunter's Bow for a little bit. It was the Ick Vial that he chooses to go, and we really don't see this item that much. But I think that if he's going to be potentially trying to trade a little bit more often, maybe it's not that bad a call. It's just that Executioner, Rage, a lot of other good items that usually go in that third slot that we're not seeing here.
Ickavel is the age-old item of, I want to fight the enemy hunter, I'm not really worried about anything else, and now Ickavel especially more powerful, getting additional power for every basic attack hit. It's going to be very nice if you're looking to do a tank burn comp, or a tank burn build, I should say. He's not going to itemize in towards crit. We might see a chin size come online, we might see an executioner come online, but it's going to be all about sustained damage over time instead of that burst damage that crit affords you, which makes sense with their playstyle if they want that sustained damage, because they have the sustained team fight. They have Hel to keep him alive, so he can afford not to do all of his damage at once.
Going to be consistently doing high damage. Johnny uses this ultimate and the Grasp of Death. This feels a bit early to me, but they've gotten the backline to panic a bit. The cleanse from StreakUp, though, was really good. Got him and emilitoo both out of the Grasp of Death and prevented the knockup from Johnny. That was huge play from the Hel this time. The ultimate from maniaKK now on cooldown as well as he regroups. Quite a bit committed. The ultimate from Rat, Persephone, and Sobek all used, and now Cold Llama's going to try and force this fight. They've got the Hel sustained, so they're certainly favored, and Johnny being hunted down by the Arachne. emilitoo gets the kill credit. Trixtank low too, make it a double for emilitoo on the Anhur. Genetics does end up falling. That's Julio that cleans him up, and Julio wants to step on the gas pedal, see if they can find a couple of return kills, but emilitoo continues to fire. Arkkyl finally shuts him down, though, and now maniaKK is stuck without an escape button. Julio gets another kill. How do they turn this fight around? Aegis allows Zyrhoes to buy some time too, and they shut down Iceice Baby. Mifflin, this fight starts so well for Cold Llamas. Where does it go wrong?
I mean, I predicted that they would look for the fight around the objective, and that's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they needed to do, but unfortunately, Johnny does a fantastic job of evading just enough damage to force Cold Llamas to overcommit to find his kill. They stack up just enough for them to find the damage they need onto all targets. StreakUp can't heal everyone up just quite well enough as he gets caught out around the red buff, escaping using that speed, but Julio picks him up.
Yeah, thanks, Julio. Arkkyl having some trouble with some of those autos there. Eventually does bring down the hell on the backside. But as you said, Johnny bought a bunch of time. This Fury will absolutely be free for Belt Slap. And it's hard to start much better than what StreakUp was able to do to keep them alive. But they bought a ton of time. Julio did massive work in that fight as well. And Zyrhoes, how is he living so often in these fights as well? It feels like he's just doing enough to avoid getting brought all the way down underneath that kill threshold. And that's been huge for Belt Slap as well. That's a problem now for Cold Llamas. That was exactly the fight they wanted, the timing they wanted, a drawn-out engagement where they could play around the Hell Sustain, and it still was not enough.
It seems like they weren't willing to disengage from the fight because it looked good at all times, so they didn't even make perfect usage of that Hell Sustain. Hell, at this point in the game, her best sustain option is out of combat healing. Belt Slap looking to pick up that Fire Giant, burning it slowly, but iceice is in position to contest it, as is Genetics. The group up's going to start here. I imagine this erupts into a team fight.
This has got to be more of a bait, right? This is too risky to be an actual Fire Giant call from Belt Slap, and they end up dropping it. Maybe not even a bait. Maybe testing the alarm system, as FDOT used to say, right? Seeing who's home, and that might have been the idea there. And when Cold Llama showed the defense was ready, Belt Slap just to give that one up. So they'll kind of retire back to their 2,800 healing or 2,800 gold lead. But like you said, Hell's not this big team fight burst healer that she once was, right? That 3 is a little bit slower. It's more healing over time as opposed to that burst. So she does kind of like to have the squad group up around her, heal, then re-engage. So maybe they didn't quite play around it as nicely as they could have, and Belt Slap correctly punished them.
They sure do. Both hunters now level 18. Yeah, iceice is having a rough game. He truly is. He hasn't been able to find any of his true targets for himself. He is 2, 3, and 5, but he hasn't been farming. It's not even that he's behind, but as we pointed out earlier, Johnny elected to completely isolate himself from team fights in favor of farming. So that's where he pulls his lead up a little bit. Level 16, he's about on par with his mid laner. He's 2 levels up on his support. He's about where his team should be. It's not even that he's behind, it's that Johnny is ahead.
Good point. You're right. There was a bunch of fights Johnny wasn't at. And I think pushing up that wave solo for iceice really helped just now. You saw he went from 15, ticked over to 16 and 17, pretty much just by forcing up those waves. He'll strip away a little bit more farm from the chaos side too. So despite the fact that iceice was maybe a bit behind Johnny there for a little while, he goes out to get some solo farm. And his team got the Pyromancer during all that time too. So that's a big win, I'd say, for Cold Llamas to close that gap a bit. And yeah, Johnny, you got to keep running. This fight ain't for you, I don't think, bud. Few people beat Arachne in the 1v1. He'll just do more defensive work here, I imagine.
He's got the heal in his first ability, Arachne does. He's got the stun. I mean, I love Arachne. I'm a huge fan of this pick. It's one of the most aggressive picks you could take. Arachne is nasty. You don't often see her competitively, and this is why you have to be worried. That stun exactly is what you have to worry about. Forcing out the beads from Johnny. Now he's going to have to look for that disengage. His dart is down. That's his huge burst potential. Blinks are traded. We're looking at a Dragon Ball Z engagement here. Too fast for the human eye. And it fizzles out now.
Wait, am I a side character, dude? They're fighting too fast for me to see. His maniac ends up in some trouble. Does manage to get that World Serpent ultimate off in time. And Johnny and iceice still scrapping. But this might be a trap as in comes the Horus to lock him down. But Johnny reads it perfectly. His only out there was to use the ultimate at the exact second he used it. And it works to get him out, but a lot of resources committed to essentially lose a fight and left.
That was almost just enough damage from Arachne's dot to kill him out of the sky, but he lives instead. Forcing that ultimate is huge. That's some of Belt Slap's best engagement options, but Genetics as well having to use his to escape out of that sticky situation. Now, Belt Slap is likely favored around this fight into the Fire Giant insofar as they take one engagement and they don't let Cold Llamas back up and use that heal. Belt Slap is always looking to start one fight and have it be one fight, whereas Cold Llamas are looking for these constant disengagements.
It is yet another bait. Genetics gets pulled in, but easily gets back out of there. Not a whole lot gained. And Julio nearly has his rage transformation forced as well. He vents a bit of that anger and is able to stay in the base Cucullin form. So that's critical play there from Julio to keep that, I almost want to call it a cooldown, available for when they need it in the fight. Johnny gets some good poke onto iceice to zone him out, but everyone else is grouped up around StreakUp as Julio moves in. Now that rage transformation will happen right when they need it, and they want to blow StreakUp up right away at the back of the fight. That's easy. Arkkyl shuts down Genetics as well. Emilitoo has to keep running for the hills, but Julio right there behind him to keep up the chase. Blinks in as well.
Nice
and
root.
now he's running here too. The stun is there, the root as well, and iceice gets the shutdown onto Julio. Maybe maniaKK and iceice can turn this around, but Johnny comes in like an assassin and shuts down Emilitoo. The rest of Beltslap now need to find a way to regroup. I don't know if he can win this 1v1. iceice gets the kill. It looks like elsewhere they lost maniaKK, their last remaining member, so it's only iceice on the Arachne still standing. But Beltslap again, all at once, storm over Cold Llamas.
I like that attempt from Dzoni to solo out iceice there. Had he landed his stun, that would have been a clean trade. Instead, couldn't quite find it, loses his life for it. I would have liked to see Beltslap immediately disengage after they get that 3 initial picks, especially picking off that Hell, and with the ward coverage they have around that Fire Giant, they could have backed up, immediately picked it up, got that buff, grouped up around these fights. Instead, maybe a little bit of an overcommitment as Julio gets caught out onto that tower, turning the page of that fight completely. The pace shifts, now it's a complete defense from Cold Llamas. Yes, they are still disadvantaged, but they effectively stopped the Fire Giant from happening with the amount of time that they bought.
I think that you're right, Mifflin. That is a bit of a misplay. I'd agree. I mean, I understand what Julio was thinking, but that's just good time being bought underneath that tier 2 tower by Cold Llamas. And then great peel as well. iceice and maniaKK worked well together there to extend that engagement out and find the punish onto Julio. But if after they get that 3 for 0, if they regroup, that's a free Fire Giant, right? I mean, there's no way Cold Llamas can take the 5v2 in that spot and try and defend. So Beltslap perhaps let that get away from them. But I think what they have demonstrated is that this Hell is not safe in the back of these fights. They can dive her and blow her up quickly, and then there is no sustain for Cold Llamas, and suddenly they're having a much harder fight.
It was Julio and Dzoni diving together with Trixtank and the ultimate to slow them down. Just an absolute spearhead. What do you do when the what is it called? The never-ending force meets the immovable object or something like that? That's what happens. The immovable object gets turned into dust as Hell falls to the ground. However, this Fire Giant's still available for both teams. They can either one could pick it up. Cold Llamas needs to find a way to start these engagements slower. They almost got that disengage off. Had Hell not fallen on that initial engagement from Beltslap, the complete dynamic of the game changes.
Dzoni gets aggressive. The grasp of death is there too, but iceice avoids all of it by climbing up to the ceiling as creepy as you like and making his way out of there. This next fight around the Fire Giant should favor Beltslap for a moment then, since iceice had to use the ult and will probably have to position a bit more safely. They'll start up this Pyromancer, not the biggest deal in the world, but if they can take this small objective, they'll gladly take it. Meanwhile, maniaKK steps forward a bit. Dzoni's keeping those waves pushed up in mid and looking for a loop, but they recognize he's there. The Hell gets grouped up with her protective entourage, and the fight has to stall.
The fight will stall indeed, but it won't stall for long. Trixtank blinking in now, looking for the engagement.
And Julio goes right to the backline, but iceice gets Dzoni. Arkkyl, though, does make him pay for it. Genetics uses the ult in place yet again to try and find the knock-up in the shell, but this is critical that StreakUp has survived this time, so they will have that Hell sustain. Beltslap likely have to give up on this entirely, or else Cold Llamas just run them over, and Trixtank starting to catch the brunt of it as he ends up low. But Arkkyl taking the fight up against maniaKK. I don't know if this 1v1 against a Hunter is really what the Jormungandr was looking for, and Zyrhoes manages to punish him for it. Instead of grouping up, maniaKK goes off on his own and gets picked, but maybe they get the kill on Zyrhoes. How is Grasp of Death back up again? Zyrhoes has it and is using it to get back out of there. Arkkyl comes in on the backside and shuts down emilitoo. They get the kill on Genetics as well. Zyrhoes may end up falling, but that only leaves StreakUp, and it doesn't matter how much sustain he has when he's fighting all alone. Arkkyl gets the triple kill, and some misplays from Cold Llamas hurt them there, Myth.
Arkkyl gets the triple kill, but we're giving all that credit to Zyrhoes, dealing immense damage, fighting off 3 members alone for 10 full seconds. That was some of the best play we've seen all season. Single-handedly turning what a fight was going to literally turn that game completely towards Cold Llama's favor. They would have got the Fire Giant, which would have led them towards fantastic siege potential off the Hell. Zyrhoes says, how about we just don't lose? And then he doesn't lose.
And I think Arkkyl made a big play too. I just cannot wrap my head around why maniaKK chooses to chase him on the left-hand side of the fight. Maybe the idea was to try and keep him zoned out. His team had the numbers advantage in that other engagement that was happening on the Chaos side of the Fire Giant pit towards that top side. But I just don't see him ever winning up against Arkkyl and all that sustained damage from the Ullr. He shuts him down there, and Zyrhoes comes in to cleanly finish off that kill. And then, as you alluded to, buy a ton of time. Both of these solo laners at times have made a couple of plays, and this might be one of them as Julio nearly gets caught, that have cost their team some pressure. iceice does get the kill, but he has to dive the tier 1 tower, and Dzoni trades him back out.
Losing Fire Giant on one of your tanky targets is never fun, but it will be absolutely fine. That trade does favor Cold Llamas, pulling the buff off of Chulainn, as well as putting him on cooldown, making it a little bit harder for them to aggress towards these towers. However, it's not enough to stop the aggression completely, especially because Trixtank's so tanky with the self-sustain as well with his third ability. He's going to be able to keep himself alive in these engagements. It's going to be easy for them to move in towards these tier 2s. Whether or not they elect to go towards this Phoenix is questionable, especially with the defensive composition that Cold Llamas has. Hell is going to be able to sustain up through the fight. maniaKK is going to be able to disrupt the backline. Emilitoo's got a very large AoE slow, as well as these chunking, sustained damage auto attacks with his chin-size Xe build. It's definitely not going to be easy.
And right now, for me, the crux of this game, I think, is how well this dive for Belt Slap works, and how much longer can it work, right? And it's really Julio, Dzoni, and Trixtank all together trying to take StreakUp out of the fights right away. They won that last fight even when the dive didn't work, but I don't know how many more times they can replicate that, right? Instead, I think that dive really has to be successful. And underneath the Phoenix, it's going to be a lot more punishing for them. When they're diving in the jungle, there's no extra Phoenixes or anything doing all this extra damage to them. They're just kind of freely getting back there and threatening StreakUp. When this game kind of condenses down underneath the Phoenix, I think Cold Llamas' composition might get even better.
It absolutely does. It makes it easier for them to group up to receive the benefit of that Hell heal, but that dive is going to be completely contingent on Hell's 6th item, whether or not she elects for some utility to maybe outrun these engagements from the Sobek, or some more power to start looking towards these backline divers and just blow them up herself. It looks like she's moving in towards the Rod of Tahuti, or even potentially a Chronos Pendant, which would overcap her on CDR, so I imagine it is Rod of Tahuti. It's going to make those low health targets a little bit easier for her to blow up, maybe make it a little less appetizing for them to dive onto her. However, I would have liked to see her maybe look towards a winged wand or a helmet to give herself some defense on heal, instead going purely for that glass cannon with only Breastplate of Valor to keep her alive.
I am a bit surprised. I think we sometimes see these Hell builds be a little bit more defensive, especially when maniaKK, I think, has been providing relevant damage all game. He's leading all players in terms of his damage. They have at least a somewhat other viable source of magic damage, though it's not a ton. As Belt Slap are going to get aggressive, and Dzoni is winning the 1v1 in mid up against iceice. That should never be happening. He shuts down the Arachne, and that's a huge play for Belt Slap. Now they don't have to worry about this Arachne potentially blowing up their targets on the dive, and Dzoni still has the ultimate 2 to threaten them on their dive. He absolutely goes into it. Trixtank goes right to the back line, drops the Curse Dog. It's all about StreakUp and taking this Hell out of the fight quickly. Genetics provides the shielding, but it's nowhere near enough. Dzoni brings StreakUp to a quick and swift in. Julio takes care of emilitoo as well, and now there's trouble in the backline for Genetics. How does this play end up happening where Dzoni shuts down iceice? It opens up the whole thing, Mifflin. This left side Phoenix comes down, and that's the game as well.
All I saw was Heartseeker burst off the back of an Acorn stun, completely shutting down Arachne before she could even land the healing auto attack. It's so unfortunate. I understand why you go for that 1v1, but it just doesn't work this time. Dzoni dying to the fountain, letting people know that, yeah, I won this game for us.
I think that he did, man. That play in mid is so instrumental, especially that he was able to do it without the ultimate. He was able to threaten StreakUp so easily then when there was no one to kind of provide this extra threat on that backline for them. And that was a Phoenix siege that I thought was actually going to be really difficult for them, but because of the way that fight went in mid, they suddenly had this number advantage, and they steamrolled them in that last fight.
I mean, play of the game for me has to be Zyrhoes on the Persephone, the 1v3 to completely turn a team fight around. That was a turning point of the game. Had Cold Llamas just run with that, they would have likely won that match and taken the set to the third match. Instead, Zyrhoes, just an absolute beast. He's still got it, as you said, and just stops that aggression purely in its tracks, and the game continues on from a neutral state, and then Belt Slap takes the lead, takes the advantage, get that solo onto the Arachne in mid. I mean, it's just clean play from both teams, but Belt Slap comes out ahead.
I agree. This game was much better than game number 1, just in terms of its competitiveness, right? I mean, game 1 was a stomp, but this time it was much more back and forth, both teams making a lot of plays, and a couple of questionable plays. That same play where I think that there was a good play from Zyrhoes, I do wonder a bit about the play from maniaKK and where he chose to spend his time. But this is what I think we can expect from these two teams the rest of the SCC. Close sets that come down to the wire. And Mifflin, the fans are wondering, man, you're going to give us a set MVP? Is it Zyrhoes for that play? Who do you want to give it to here, bud?
It hurts me so much. I'm glad I'm casting with you and not aggro, because I do have to give it to the mid laner this time. Zyrhoes. Man, it's some of the nastiest plays we've seen. Yeah. I'm so utterly impressed. It's not easy to just turn a fight on its head on your own, and even once he did fall, Persephone doesn't die for long. She's going to come back in that ghostly form and continue the damage onslaught.
This is the exact play that you were referring to. She buys just enough time for her squad to show up, and then they start to unleash hell truly by cleaning up the rest of that fight. And it was such thin margins. There were a ton of really small plays. Remember that Gold Fury fight where Johnny kind of gets picked off early? He lives just long enough, chases them back towards the top side of the Gold Fury on the Chaos side, and that's too much of an overcommit. They're able to turn that fight there off. Some good play from Julio and the rest of the squad. So I think what Belt Slap showed us is that even when things aren't going perfectly, they're able to play just well enough that the rest of their team can come in and turn things around for them.
Not only just well enough, but they played to Cold Llama's tune. That was a late game focused draft that Belt Slap said, yeah, we'll take you there and we'll beat you there as well. And they did. I mean, both teams played utterly well. Cold Llamas makes just a few too many mistakes on their engagements after they win objectives, which is my pet peeve, but it wasn't egregious this time. And fortunately, Belt Slap run away with it.
They do. I mean, it's a big win for Belt Slap. And it's sort of like you said, I mean, I thought we were gearing up for a long, stalled out Phoenix siege, in all honesty. I'd gotten up to get a drink. I don't know if you heard me step away. I assumed I was going to have to sit down for a while there. But no, they ran over them with that left side Phoenix. So that was huge for Belt Slap. They remain undefeated. Cold Llamas dropped down to 2-1. But we still have another EU set coming up and 2 more North America sets. So do not even consider going anywhere else. Come right back here for some more SCC after the break.